Hey guys, today I'm going to talk about custom authentication state provider. In my last episode, I talked about the authentication which comes out of the box for Blazor application, but it had some disadvantages like you have to go with code first approach, there is no API design, and then you have to use old Razor pages. It's difficult to migrate your user into database tables which are provided when you add authentication support. And then we discuss how we can follow these steps to create your own custom authentication state provider, and then manage the state of your user across the application, across all the Blazor page application, and we do not have to rely on Razor pages for this. All right, so for that, I have given myself a head start here, and I've created this login component. It's a very simple component where I'm taking email address of the user and then a password. When I click on it, it should go to, now it's not doing it, but it should go to the index page and show welcome email address of the user who has logged in. So yeah, let's look at the code. I have added this login Razor here, login page. It's very simple. I'm taking email address and password. I have bound this user model here, which just has two fields. It just has two fields, email address and password. And then I'm calling validate user when I click on login. I'm not going to validate my user using my API. I'm going to concentrate on how we can have custom state provider, custom authentication state provider in application today, and then maybe in future videos I'll talk about that. All right, so very first step that we have to follow is we'll have to enable authentication and authorization to our Blazor application. To do that, I'm gonna go to my startup page here. And here I'm gonna say app.use authentication and say use authorization. Nice. Now that and this is all you have to do to enable authentication or authorization to your Blazor app. Now we'll have to add our custom authentication state provider, which will give us state of our authenticated user. So I'm going to call it custom authentication state provider. Custom authentication state provider. Nice. And to make this class as authentication state provider, I'm going to inherit authentication state provider here. Nice. Let's bring in some namespaces, and this is going to throw an error because we'll have to override a function. We'll have to implement this get authentication state async. See, this is a very important function because this gets called when you load the application for the first time, and this provides the state of the authentication either from the SQL server or local storage or dependency injection, however you want, you are maintaining, however you are managing state of your user in your application. So this is not it's not implemented right now. This will throw an exception. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to return a hard-coded user here. His name is johnsmith@gmail.com. Let's bring in some namespaces here. So what's going to happen, the reason why I added this code, I wanted to return authentication state of a hard-coded user because I do not have any user right now when I load my application. All right. So the next thing that we have to do, now we have our authentication state provider. We'll have to add this authentication state provider in our startup page here. We have to initialize this provider when services are up. So I'm gonna say add a scoped instance. Add a scoped instance instance of our authentication state provider. Let's say authentication state provider, and we'll use our custom authentication for the implementation. All right, nice. Now we added authentication support, now we have our own custom authentication state provider. We will have to tell our application route that now we are expecting this as parameter. We are expecting authentication state as cascading parameter, which could be passed across application and we could use it. To do that, I'm going to go to my app.Razor here, and I'm going to say AuthorizeRouteView. So if you say AuthorizeRouteView, this component takes state provider authentication state as cascading parameter, and if we need that parameter across our application, we could use it. And you can say that we need cascading authentication state. These are the two components which take authentication state as cascading parameter, so we can have access in both of our layouts. Nice. So once we do that, we can go to our index page because that's the page which gets loaded, and here we'll have to show welcome message to the person who has logged in into the system. So right now when the application loads, John Smith will be authenticated by default, so we want to show his name. We want to show his name here. So now that I'm passing cascading parameter, I'm passing authentication state as cascading parameter, I can use AuthorizeView, authorized and not authorized components in my UI, which is the last step, which is the last step here. So if I want to show the message, what I'm going to do, I'm going to say welcome. This is when it will this paragraph, it will be shown when the user is authorized, and I'm going to say context user identity name. So basically I'm trying to show johnsmith@gmail.com, which will be populated here. Nice. But if the user is not validated, if the user is not authenticated, I'm going to say you are signed out. Nice. They will get this signed out message. Let's run this and see how this looks. So when I go to my index page here, you can see that johnsmith@gmail.com is coming by default. And if I go to my custom state provider, and here I tell my state provider to not return the identity, just return an empty claims identity, then it should show the user is not validated, user is not authenticated. Let's see how this runs. So when I go to my index page, you can see that it says you are signed out right now. All right, but this is not how normal applications work, right? You normally go to your login page, you enter email address and password, and when you click on it, then it goes to the index page, and then it shows the person who has logged in, right? So how do we achieve that? Let's look at our login page here. See the login page, we will have to inject our state provider here, and we'll have to tell our state provider that it needs to change its state when user is validated. When the user is valid, you need to change your state and say that you are authenticated. So how do we do that? For that, I'm going to create a function. I'm going to call it mark user as authenticated, and this will take string as a parameter, and I'm gonna say that this is the user which will get returned. So what I'm planning to do is I'm planning to call this function when user clicks on login button. So, and I'm gonna pass the email address of the person who's valid, and this is what will get returned when this is well it will get returned when user is authenticated. But what we need to do is the authentication state will have to send it to notify. We have to send it to notify authentication has authentication changed event. So if we send it to this will tell our authentication state provider that you have this has been changed. The state of the application has changed. You need to tell your whole application that user is authenticated now. And I'm gonna get rid of this and uncomment this so that we have identity. And instead of John Smith, I'm gonna pass here the email address of the person. Nice. And like I said, this is the function which will tell application that user is authenticated now, and this should be called when we click on that validate button, when we click on the login button here. So to call this function, I'm gonna say I'm gonna inject authentication state provider, and now this is very important line here. I'm going to convert my authentication state provider to custom authentication state provider, and then I'm gonna call that mark. User is authenticated, and then pass user email address. So what's happening here? Now I'm calling mark user is authenticated when user clicks on login, and then I'm passing the email address of the person, which will be returned as authenticated user to whole application. All right. Another thing that we need to do, we'll have to navigate to our index page. So we'll have to bring our old friend navigation manager here, and and I'm gonna say navigation manager, navigate to our homepage. Cool. Let's run this and see how this works. So when I load the application for the first time, you can see that it's signed out because it goes to get authentication state async, and then it's not returning any authenticated user. Now I'm going to go to login screen, and here I'm gonna say johnsmith@gmail.com and enter any password, and when I click on login, it goes to my page here and says John Smith has been logged in. If I go to another component, come back, it's still there. If I log in by Bill Gates at gmail.com and I click on login, it shows Bill Gates has been logged in. But there is a huge problem here. If I refresh my page, it says user has signed up. The reason why it says user you're signed out is because now it's calling this get authentication state async. When we clicked on login, it said, okay, the user is logged in. This is the user, not notify our state authentication state that the state has been changed. But when we refresh our page, this is what gets called, and it's returning the user is not authenticated. So what we need to maintain state of the user across our application. And there are different methods that you can do it, but today I'm going to follow I'm going to store my state in SessionStorage. And there is a package that we can install. It's called as Blazor. You all should it's a very cool package. You can store your state in local storage, which will keep the state even if you close the browser, even if you go to a different tab. You have SessionStorage, which will keep the state even if you refresh the page. But if you go to a different tab or if you close your browser, you will lose the session. And I believe SessionStorage is the best way to go. If you don't like it, you can go with local storage. But if you're making a line of business application, SessionStorage is the best way to go, because if you are making a banking application, if you want to go to a different tab, you don't want to have the same state. So today I'm going to use SessionStorage because I want my user to log in every time they load their application. When they load, unless they save it in the cookies or something. But today I'm going to use SessionStorage. So let's click on it and see what are the steps that we have to follow. First thing, we'll have to install SessionStorage. So I'm going to go and look in my packages here. I'm going to go to manage NuGet packages and say we would like Blazor, and here I'm going to use SessionStorage, this package, and I'm going to install it. Cool. The next thing that I will have to do is I will have to add the Blazor support, the session storage for my application. So I'm gonna go to my setup page here, and after my singleton here, I'm gonna add it here. We'll have to bring in some namespaces, so I'm gonna do that. Nice. One more thing to notice about the session storage is because this, if you want to use it, you will have to go to your host.cshtml and tell your render mode as server mode, because this session storage, they make JavaScript calls, and you cannot make JavaScript calls unless and until your page is fully rendered. So make sure you change in your _host CSHTML to tell the user, to tell the application to render the full application before it gets passed to the browser. All right, we can talk more about it in some other episode, but right now I'm just gonna add this session storage and change the rendering to server. All right, so now we have this Blazor session storage. Let's use it. I'm gonna go to my login page here, and I'm gonna tell here that we need to inject. We can copy it from here. I'm gonna copy this line to inject in our login page, and here I'm going to add a key which will be the email address of the user, so that even if I refresh the page, it will be stored in this session storage, and it won't pick up an unauthenticated user from get authentication state. So we'll have to set the user in login page and get the user from our get authentication state async. So on login page, what I'm going to do here, I'm going to say that I would like to set an item, and here I'm going to say email address of the authenticated user, which is user.email address, and this is an async function, so let's put await keyword here. Nice. Now if you want to use this session storage, the injected session storage in our authentication state provider, what I'm going to do, I'm going to write a constructor here. I'm going to say constructor which takes I session storage service, and I will have to pull in some namespaces here. Nice. and then I'm gonna have a private variable of the same type, which will be assigned to when the service gets injected. So I'm gonna say underscore session storage service should be assigned to session storage service. Nice. So now we have access to the session storage in our both in our login page and in our provider here in our authentication state provider. So this is where I'm going to change the code. I'm going to tell when the application is refreshed, if the user has value in the session storage, that time you should return the user. If it doesn't have the value, that time you should return the author user is not authenticated. All right, so first let's get the user. Let's get the value in, I'm going to say var email address is equal to underscore session storage service, and I'm gonna get item async here, and this is a string. So I'm gonna get a string here and say email address. So we want email address from our session storage service. Then we'll have to add an await keyword here, and we'll have to tell our function that it's async function now. It's an async function. Nice. So now we have we'll have to add a await keyword here too. Now we have the email address of the person which we are storing in our login page, and now we'll have to pull this email address when we refresh the page so that we doesn't lose the state of the user. So I'm gonna say here if email address is not null, then call this piece of code where we are assigning the identity, and or else you can assign an empty identity. That means the user is not authenticated in the storage here. We'll have to initialize this identity, so let's do that. Initialize. Nice. And get rid of this var so that it doesn't have multiple variables here. All right, so what are we trying to do here? Now we are pulling our user from our session storage. If the user is there, then we are telling that even if the page is refreshed, tell the application that the application is authenticated, and we are setting that in our mark user authenticated in our login page here. All right, let's run this and see how this works. So right now it's you're signed out, and I click on login. Here I'm gonna say johnsmith@gmail.com, and when I click on login, it navigates and it says johnsmith@gmail.com. Let's try refreshing the page. When I refresh the page, it still has John Smith in my application. You can do multiple times. And if you go to a different tab, then it's going to tell you that you are signed out, and that's the most secure way to go about it. All right, so now we managed to go to our login page and enter email address and password, and then we are showing johnsmith@gmail.com. Now what I want to do, I want to make this login click as logout click when the user is authenticated, and when they click on logout, I want to clear out the session storage and tell my application that the user is not authenticated. So how do we do that? To do that, I'm gonna go to my main layout, and here I'm gonna say that if I want to use AuthorizeView here, and if the user is authorized and if the user is not authorized. If the user is not authorized, then we would like to see login link. And if the user is not authorized, if the user is authorized, then we would like to see logout button here. Logout button here. Nice. So what I want to do though, I want to call my logout click. So right, just like how we call this mark as authenticated function, I would like to call mark user as logged out. So to do that, I am going to say public void mark user as logged out, and this will do the same thing, except it will tell the user is not authenticated, except initializing any identity. I'm gonna tell that there is nothing, we are emptying out all the identity here. Nice. We will have to do one more thing here though. We'll have to, just like we are checking in login click here, in login click we are adding a item here and telling the email address is added, and the user is authenticated. We'll have to empty out our session store. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm gonna say before we even initialize our identity, I'm gonna say remove item async, and I would like to remove email address. Nice. All right, so let's go to our main layout now. As this is a component too, we can inject our authorization state provider, authentication state provider, and then we can have code like public void logout, and when you click on logout, I would like to call this function, which will call mark user as logged out, so that user gets kicked out of the system. So I'm going to call mark user as logged out, and when user click on this logout, I want to say on click, I want to call a function. Which is going to call logout. Sweet. Awesome. Let's run this and see how this works. So user is signed out right now. I'm going to go to login button here. I'm going to say John Smith at gmail.com, and password anything, doesn't matter. When I click on login, you can see John Smith is logged in. Even if I refresh the page, John Smith stays there. If I go to a different component, John Smith stays there. And you can see now it's showing logout button. And when I click on logout, it goes to the login page, and if I go to index page, you are signed out. So this is how you can use custom state provider, authentication state provider, to call your own validation code and use authentication state provider across your application using SessionStorage. You can use any method to do state management. So yeah, hope you like the video, and if you have any questions, you can reach out to me on Twitter or Facebook. And yeah, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.